You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. Hello everyone and welcome all to another amazing episode of Changing Reality. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us for this week's episode. If this is your first time watching Changing Reality, a little FYI for you guys, Changing Reality is a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are in essence changing their own reality. So through this show, we'll be hanging out and interviewing social change makers, entrepreneurs, business owners, industry leaders, people who are going around coming up with new inventions, people who have revolutionized industries, as well as artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world. Well, many of them have actually spent time on the Penn campus as well. So by hearing these inspiring stories on how they are changing the worlds that they live in, changing their own lives, their own careers, hopefully we'll be able to pick out little snippets of wisdom, little nuggets that we can apply in our own life in building the careers, the lifestyles that we want for ourselves. And I wanted to do this show simply because I feel like there are so many phenomenal people out there who make waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm passionate about learning how they're doing this in their own capacity and how the ripple effects create so much change in industry and the people around them, so that with this knowledge, we can hopefully figure out how we can solve the problems that we want in the world, how we can similarly have that effect of changing the lives of those around them through changing ourselves. And to show you how important or how much I love the stories and the power that stories hold, especially when they're real world stories and experiences. I actually personally founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance. It started back in Malaysia, which is where I'm from. But today it collaborates with over 28 different countries, Ministry of Education, large companies, MNCs, to provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college, to various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves and the world around them through real-world experiences, and take those meaningful experiences and come back and create their own careers while they're still in school. That not only has a meaningful impact for themselves, but for those around them too. And to date, we've been fortunate to work with 35,000 youngsters in 970 communities and have incubated countless number of student-run projects, social enterprises, and many other things run by students aged 8 to 25 years old. And the basis for all of this has been stories. It's been kind individuals who are willing to share their stories to shorten the learning curve of these youngsters who want to do something a little bit different. And I hope in that same vein that this show provides that same opportunity for all of you who are listening. That by hearing this area of experiences, this diversity of things that have happened to people, we not only get inspired, but we also see the limitless possibilities. And that in turn helps helps us see the discrepancies, the similarities, the tools that we can use to change the world around us. So if you have any more questions about the show, if there's anything that you want to know specifically, please do reach out. You can drop a comment in the chat below if you have anything specific you want to talk about, and we'll definitely see how we can incorporate it into the show as well. So today's speaker is someone who probably has revolutionized an industry in a part of the world at a truly phenomenal pace. So we have with us Douglas Abrams, the founder and CEO of Expara, Southeast Asia's leading accelerator and venture fund. He has launched and invested in 5 VC funds since 2007. He is an Adjunct Associate Professor at the National University of Singapore's Business School, where he lectures on new venture creation for undergraduates and postgraduates since 2001, and a visiting professor in venture capital at Sassin Graduate Institute of Business Administration in Bangkok as well. So he has not only lectured in Vietnam, Bangkok, Singapore, places all around the world, but he's also someone who is very active in the venture space, both in Southeast Asia. He was the former chairman of Business Angel Network of Southeast Asia and previous deputy co-chairman, and was director in 2002 to 2018. And he also served on the board of Media Development Authority of Singapore from 2009 to 2010. As well as having founded many other funds, including Parallax Capital Management, a Singapore-based funds managed capital in 2000. He also had a phenomenal career prior to coming to Singapore in 2000, where he actually managed information technology at JP Morgan for 14 years and was the global markets head of internet marketing and vice president and manager of investment banking technology. So, without further ado, let's invite our extremely accomplished guest speaker to our virtual stage. Hello. Hi, Douglas. Thank you so much for joining in. How are you today?
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here, Harsha, and I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be having to have a chance to talk to Penn students from the other side of the world in Singapore.
Yep. So one thing I didn't mention is that you actually are alumni of Penn, which is amazing. And personally, it's phenomenal. But every time I meet alumni, because I just am so inspired by the way that they've charted their journey and the way that you specifically have actually literally crossed halfway around the world, made so much change in the lives of others, and had an extremely interesting career path yourself. So before we go into detail of all of the amazing things that you've done as an individual, I have to ask though, you were someone who did your bachelor's of communication at Penn itself. When you were at Penn, did you know exactly like that this would be the path for you? I mean, you didn't study venture specifically, so communications is a little bit different. And was this like part of some grand scheme of things that you knew you wanted to do? You had it all planned out, or was it just something that I don't know, were you as lost and confused as the rest of us back then?
Oh, definitely. I never imagined in a million years that this is where I would be when I was at Penn in 1976 till 1980. I think if I had to make a list of 1,000 different places I would be in, things that I'd be doing in 2022, this would definitely have not been on that list. I had no idea that the path I would take after graduation would lead me here, and no plan to do anything similar to this. When I was an undergrad majoring in communications, I had some vague idea that I wanted to work in publishing or media, which actually I did do for a while after graduation. But not only did I never think that I would be involved in venture capital or investing in startups, but I never even imagined or wanted to work in financial services, have any interest in working in any type of investment. And in fact, I remember thinking back then it would be really boring to work in a bank, even though I knew, a lot of fellow students felt differently. And obviously I feel differently now, but it certainly wasn't in my long-term plan at that time. And even post-graduation, it wasn't my long-term plan to get to Singapore to do venture capital. So it was, I would have to go with pretty much no idea what I really wanted to do when I was an undergrad. And even when I graduated, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I took the approach of, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I tried to do things that I thought were interesting and challenging, and ultimately that led me to where I am now.
Absolutely phenomenal. And I think you tried out many things after you're in college to very like amazing heights of success, even in your first few things that you tried. What was the first major like role or job or thing that you did after Penn when you first graduated? I mean, many of us either we are worried about lining jobs up, we're worried about like interviews and all of that, or on the other hand, we are still deciding what's the first thing we want to do. Do we want to travel? Do we want to go out? Do we want to take a gap year? What were you doing like your first year out of Penn?
Yeah, so interestingly, I wasn't very concerned about interviewing or getting a job when I graduated from school. Not sure why, but I didn't get stressed out about that at that time. I mean, I think they're generally two types of people in university. People who know what they want to do and probably have known what they wanted to do for a long time. They have a very specific goal and they're pursuing it, and they go from point A to point B to point C to the outcome that they're trying to achieve, which is great. I have tremendous respect for that. And then there are other people like me who not really sure what they wanted to do and trying to find the way. So for me, I was trying to find a way. When I first graduated, I didn't have a job lined up. I hadn't interviewed. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I decided to travel. So a friend of mine who was also graduated from Penn at the same time, we took a cross-country tour of the U.S., basically just driving and camping and going to many different places. And we did that for about 2 months. So it was really, really fun, really exciting. I hadn't been to that many places in the U.S. at that time. I had been mostly in the East Coast. So we started from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. We drove all the way across the country to California, and then we drove all the way back over about a 2-month period. And not not really having a very specific itinerary or a real plan, just sort of go where the road took us, and it was very enjoyable. And I can still, it's more than 40 years, but I still remember that trip very clearly. So that was the first activity, and I never felt like, oh, I'm missing out, I'm falling behind. I felt like, oh, I'm experiencing something new, something exciting, learning about new places and creating memory that again, now I can still look back on fondly. But then when I got back from this trip, I didn't have a clear plan what I wanted to do next, but I did decide I should probably start working. So I took a temporary job in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which was hosting a very important, at that time, exhibit of Picasso painting and works. The whole museum was turned over to Picasso, and I just took a job as a security guard, like standing in the museum and telling people not to touch the paintings. This was the main job content. But what was really great about that job was I got to pick the gallery that I wanted to stay in. So each day I would stay in a different gallery and I would look at the paintings or the artwork all day, and I would have a chance to really study and experience it. And that was, I think, a really helpful introduction to me about no matter what job you're doing, there can be tremendous value in that job if you approach it in the right way. So, of course, I've never before or since had the opportunity to spend so much time with such great art and just nothing to do but stand there and look at it. And it was another experience that was really valuable, not really in a plan, but just sort of random, but that I really enjoyed and also I think learned a lot from. Of course, I couldn't continue to do that after exhibit ended. So by the time that ended, then I decided I needed to get a real job. So that's when I got my first real job in book publishing. So I I applied for it and I got a job in Crown Publishers, which back then was independently owned. At that time was second largest independent publisher in the US. Now it's an imprint and Random House. And I applied for and I got a job there as an editorial assistant. So started a real career in book publishing. I was living in New Jersey at that time, post-graduation, but a few months after I got the job, I moved into New York City and then began my first career as an editorial assistant in book publishing.
Absolutely brilliant. And just to pause a little bit on here, I love the very many experiences that you had even before you started, okay, this is the career that I want to be. You traveled, you spent time with art. These are all things that I feel like we know in theory enrich the soul and broaden horizons, but we don't often take time to do in practice when we're busy kind of like in the rush of things. What do you think were your biggest takeaways or the most enriching part of those experiences, like now looking back? Is it something that you still hold dear and you still think that, okay, everyone should do something like this at some point in their life, or how do you feel about it now looking back?
I think the most important lesson I took, or what stuck with me about those experiences, was just do what you want to do. Don't focus on what you should be doing or what everybody else is doing or what others are telling you that you should do or what you think you should do. Just do what you want to do and do something that you're passionate about. Do something that you're going to enjoy doing. And if you do, by doing that consistently, you're going to you're not only going to enjoy your life, but you're going to have maximum fulfillment of your potential. Because I believe that your maximum fulfillment of your potential and deriving meaning from your life comes a lot from doing things that are important to you and things you enjoy doing and things that create meaningful outcomes for you. So each of those things, like the trip that I took, I enjoyed doing it and it was meaningful to me and I took away meaningful results. Even the temporary job in the museum, it was something I enjoyed doing and I took away meaningful results from that. And even though I couldn't see, so it wasn't something where I had a very clear plan of how these were going to get me to a certain place, but in fact, they did get me to the next step, which was they did ultimately lead to my next step, which was the book publishing career, which again was, this was something, maybe this was the closest to a plan that I had because I did have the closest to a choice that I made that was consistent with some sort of long-term plan because I did always love books. I was an editor of my high school newspaper, so I enjoyed editing. I loved to read books. I thought books were one of the most important things in the world because they contain so much knowledge and learning and I loved to read back then. Actually, I love to read since I learned to read until today, and I'm always reading books. So if I had to think about what was my career thinking when I was younger in university, I thought to be involved with books or writing somehow, maybe newspaper or maybe I didn't specifically think book publishing, but to be in a career that involved writing was probably the closest to a plan that I had. So when I got into book publishing, that was a step down that road. A concrete step down that road.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, that I did that for 5.5 years, and then I changed to a totally new direction. But at least that was something consistent with something like a long-term plan. But after, and I had a very rewarding and enjoyable career in book publishing because I started out as editorial assistant and then I became an assistant editor and moved up through the editorial ranks within Crown and ultimately became an acquisition editor in my mid-20s, which was pretty good career progression for book publishing at that time. And I was happy about that and excited. But actually, after about 5 years in book publishing, I realized that this probably wasn't the long-term career that I wanted. I started to feel like, yeah, I love to read books, but and there's a comment from one of my dogs who may be joining us at this point. So I realized that I really love to read books, and there you can see one. This is Lisa. Liz joining us in the background. So I love to read books, but I didn't enjoy as much creating books or being part of book creation as I did reading. So I realized I could still read all the books that I wanted without having a job in book publishing. And I started to feel like maybe this was good up to a point, and it was exciting and a little glamorous because it was in New York City and book publishing was sort of part of media back then. And it was, I worked with a lot of brilliant people, talented people, but I started to feel like this next step in the career was going to take a really long time because there weren't a lot of next level positions after this editorial, after I became an acquisitions editor. And I think I was looking at maybe my next big move, next step up was going to take 10 years. And I think when I was mid-20s, like 10 years seemed like forever. Now I can make 10-year career plans and feel pretty comfortable. I mean, in venture capital, our fund lives are typically 10 years. So when we launch a new fund, we're thinking about what we're going to do 10 years from now, and it seems okay. I think at 25, I thought 10 years is forever, and I can't really plan comfortably that far ahead. So I decided it was a good time to make a change.
No, I don't blame you. 10 years is like a very long time for my brain to process. So like I understand the logic of 25-year-old you, but it's still like amazing that you actually like had something that you loved. You actually had time in that kind of career. I hope that's Lisa. Hi. Anyway, so like when you started, when you were in that industry, you like, was it as glamorous? Like as you mentioned that, you go for book parties, you do like so many fun and interesting things. You meet amazing people, but it was also at a time where I don't think you had Microsoft Word processor to be able to edit and put together things the way we can now. So what was the actual experience like when you were there, and how did that lead to you transitioning to the next thing that you're doing?
Oh yeah, definitely. There was a lot of social aspect to that career, and a lot, some fun and glamour stuff. But there was also a lot of hard work and long hours and low pay. And I think that was typical of book publishing back then. So in I was living in New York City, and it wasn't as expensive back then as it is now, but it's still pretty expensive. So my
New
book
York.
publishing, yeah, New York is just expensive, and my book publishing salary wasn't enabling me to live that comfortably in New York. So I wanted to augment my income. So I decided to start doing some freelance work, and I set up my first company. So this is, I think, my first experience of entrepreneurship of myself. I set up just a single person company to do freelance work, and the work that I was doing was manuscript retyping. So back then, book manuscripts were typewritten, and then copy editors would edit the manuscripts literally with a pencil. So we talk about that today, the idea of marking up a manuscript, but they were really marked up with pencil, red pencils. And after all of the editorial suggestions and the back and forth on the manuscript would have to be retyped, incorporating the handwritten changes. And my job in my freelance role was to take these edited manuscripts and retype them into a fresh, clean, typewritten manuscript with no mistakes. And this was pretty not creative and not like
And
challenging
extremely
job.
stressful, I'd imagine.
Yeah, this was just very tedious and time consuming, but it was relatively well paid for that type of work. But because I was working long hours in book publishing, I had to do my manuscript retyping at night. So I would usually start retyping manuscripts around 9 or 10 p.m. and finish 1 or 2 a.m. And I would get paid per page. So it was very important that to optimize my time, I had to produce perfect pages every night. And it would take about a week or 10 days to complete a manuscript. So one terrible problem I encountered in this job was, because I was using a typewriter, which electric typewriter, but still a typewriter, it would happen. And especially since I was retyping things late at night, I would sometimes make a mistake. And if that mistake was missing a word or missing a line, jumping from one line to another, because, for example, 2 lines started with the same word, if I left out a line or even a couple of words, and I didn't realize that until the end of the night when I went back to check the pages, all of the pages after that mistake would be useless, because I would have to go back to where I made the original mistake and retype everything after that. So, of course, this was very frustrating situation for me. I'm already tired, ready to go to sleep, and then realizing all this work is unpaid because I'm going to have to retype. And I can still clearly remember doing, this typing in my office, which was, I think, on the 17th floor of the Crown Office building. And I was looking out the window, past my typewriter at the time when I had a mistake in one of these pages, realizing I was going to have to retype everything. And I felt like I wanted to take the typewriter and throw it out the window. From frustration. Of course, I would never do that, but
I would have loved you. I would just go like, oh, I mean, yeah.
Probably there was nobody in the street that late at night, so it would have been, but we still would have had damage to the window and everything. But and I remember the typewriter was IBM Selectric 2. It was a great typewriter at that time. But anyway, so this became a very, painful problem for me. And then at around the same time, or shortly after this, we got in the Crown office, we got something called IBM Display Writer. Now, it wasn't a computer, it was a dedicated word processing machine. You can go check it on Google. It was a giant machine, but by today's standards, and all it did was let you use a word processing software, basically, to create documents. And I started to play with it. There was only one in the whole company, and but I wanted to see what it did. I tested it, out, and I realized that you could use this machine to create documents just like I was using a typewriter, except that all the documents were stored in digital file. And if you made a mistake, you could go back and correct it before you printed it out. And then when you corrected it, you could just repaginate the document. I still remember the moment when I discovered this repagination function, and I thought my whole world changed. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but in a small but very important way, my reality changed, because now this terrible pain of you missed a line and you're going to have to retype 10 or 20 pages suddenly is gone forever. And I took away this was one of these, light bulb moments for me, where I understood what I now call value proposition, which is a new technology solves a painful problem for customers. And I was a customer for this technology. I had a very painful problem, and it was now gone because of this new technology. So from that moment until now, I fell in love with technology because I realized that it can solve painful problems. Now, of course, there's two sides to that, and technology can also create painful problems. But in that situation, I immediately fell in love with technology, computers, and word processing software. And I taught myself how to use the word processing machine. And from then on, I never, was angry at my typewriter again.
All right, the people walking down the street were a lot safer for a while. You also started like you. This was also around the time, I think, when you thought of, I think, leaving your job in book publishing and starting your own thing and starting something by yourself and going full time as a freelancer. How was it like? I think for anyone who makes the decision, that's always kind of like the hardest jump, to actually leave a full time job and go and try something that maybe is not as certain. How was it like for you making that decision, and how did you go again thinking about what do I do next? Your next career job ended up in JP Morgan, which is where people plot and think and I don't know, have whiteboards or chalkboards in their houses of their 10-step plan of how are they going to get it, like how are they going to get a job there. But you had a very interesting part to transitioning in there, right?
Oh yeah, it was even a little more random than that, because when I left book publishing, when I left Crown, I really didn't know what I was going to do next. So it wasn't that I wasn't in a situation yet where I thought I'm going to go out and start something on my own. I was in a situation where it was time to make a change, and I left the company without having a real plan what I was going to do next. And then after that, then I started thinking, okay, what should I do? And I took some freelance work, reading movie manuscripts, and then it was springtime, and I was living on 102nd Street in between West End and Riverside Drive in Manhattan, and it was a nice spring, and I was able to spend time in the park, and it was really pleasant. But again, I started thinking, okay, now better make some more money, and I need to get some steady income. And a friend of mine, who I was discussing this situation with, mentioned to me, she said, "Oh, you know how to use a word processing machine, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I learned how to do that while I was at Crown." And she said, you can get a well-paying temporary job doing word processing, because back then it was rare and not a lot of people knew how to use these machines. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, why don't I try that? And I signed up with a temporary agency and indicated that I had word processing skill. So the temporary agency got back to me with my first assignment, which was a 2-day assignment doing temporary word processing at JP Morgan. And I thought, oh, okay, that's great. And I went to do the 2-day word processing assignment, and that was the beginning of my 14-year career at JP Morgan. I never left, after that 2-day assignment. So that was another very random, career transition where the publishing career led me to the to my nighttime manuscript retyping job, which led me to learn word processing, which led me to a temporary job doing word processing, which led me to a 2-day assignment at JP Morgan that extended into a 14-year career. So yeah, when I talk to people about my career path, I like to say, I believe that I have a unique career path. I believe that if there may be nobody else in the world that followed this exact career path, and I think it's a great fit with the theme of your program, which is there are many, many paths to get you where you want to go. You don't need to follow any particular path or any path that has already been established. You can create your own path, which is exactly what I've been doing for the last now 42 years. So
Absolutely.
2-day word processing, got to JP Morgan, and then again, I had never, even at that time, I did start to get start to get more interested in banking because there was I had been following in the news, like more news about Wall Street. This was during 1980s, so it was now it's like 1985. So there was corporate raiders on Wall Street. There was junk bonds on Wall Street. So there were starting to be interesting news coming out of Wall Street and some things I never really had heard of before. So I started reading about that in the news, and I thought, oh, Wall Street sounds a little more interesting than I imagined working in a bank. And then suddenly I was working on Wall Street because actually my first assignment at JP Morgan was in Midtown office, but subsequently I moved to downtown office, which was at 15 Broad and also later at 60 Wall. So this did ultimately lead me to really career on actual Wall Street, which was a big change for me, but also something that I learned a lot from, and that led me ultimately to my current, career, third career. So I had the first career book publishing, second career in managing technology and investment banking, and then global markets at JP Morgan, and then third career running my own company, doing venture capital investment and incubation, acceleration, and training in Singapore.
Insane. That's the way it would pass to my mind.
Strange, but true. Imagine if you set out to write that story. This is the career path that somebody would follow, and you would think, wow, that couldn't happen in real life, but in fact, it did happen to me in real life, and it's still happening today. So here I am.
No, it's amazing. And especially because, if you get a 2-day temp job, normally most people will go in for 2 days, maybe 3, a month if they're extremely lucky. You had a 14-year career, when you ended up at a very, very high position when you decided to be vice president and manager of investment banking technology. That is not what I think most people expect going into a 2-day job at a firm where I think many people are fighting to be a part of, or Wall Street itself is something that we have a certain perception of, that it's very tough to get in, it's very difficult to make it in. But you stood out from the very beginning. What was it, do you think, about you that enabled you to actually grow so fast and actually grow in this extremely tough field and shine despite having kind of like the bare minimum of recognition in the very beginning stages?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And just to clarify a little bit, like the vice president at JP Morgan at that time, I would say it's sort of a senior middle management role. It wasn't super, high level. I mean, because there was managing director above vice president, which was really the high level position. So I think I did okay there. I did advance a lot from temporary word processor to vice president, which was a great career progression. But just to be clear about that. So, and I like to say that, starting as temporary word processor was almost below the bottom of the career ladder. I mean, almost, again, there were very few people most people that started at the same time as me at JP Morgan. They took a much more traditional route into JP Morgan. So they would come in as an analyst, undergraduate. They would maybe do an internship, then they would get hired as an analyst, then they would work for 2 years as an analyst, then they would leave JP Morgan to get an MBA, complete MBA, and then either come back to JP Morgan as an associate or go to another investment bank as an associate. So I think that was the most common career path. But for me, entering as a temporary word processor and building that into a career was very unusual. Now, so yes, what enabled me to do that? So I think that it was not just one thing, but I think the way I basically did that was I took initiative. So no matter what I was doing in JP Morgan, as I tried to develop my career, I always tried to do a great job at it and learn while I was doing it, and then add more value. So for example, when after the temporary word processing job, one of my most important tasks was photocopying. So I would photocopy documents for hours. I would stand at the photocopy machine with hundreds or thousands of pages and make copies. And you might think this is, very boring and trivial job, but of course it was, pretty boring to make so many copies. But what I would do was, when I was copying the documents, I would read the documents at the same time. So while I was copying, I was also reading. So while I was reading, I learned about a lot of the products that I would have no exposure to in my day-to-day work. But because I was photocopying documents at plenty of time, so it was a good chance to learn about products. And the second thing was, I was always looking for opportunities to add value and to do things that other people didn't want to do. So I eventually was able to, after some very simple word processing tasks, then I was able to figure out ways to use the word processing software to improve the business productivity. Like, for example, I helped to organize a client event by creating a very simple and early database to track invitations and RSVPs, which previously had been done by hand. So I was able to think about, how can I, even though I'm in a pretty, let's say, don't have a lot of authority or not in a very important position, but how can I still add value? And after that, I came up with another idea, was to use desktop publishing software, which was a very new type of software at that time, to produce client presentation books, which nobody had been doing before. And this became my basically full-time job. So after I stopped doing the temporary word processing, I started using desktop publishing software to produce client presentation books, which was actually a very important part of the investment banking business back then. So we would produce hundreds of these books a week, and we were using very traditional methods of typing and then sending them out to the printer. And I realized we could use desktop publishing software to do the same thing much more cost effectively, efficiently, and better, because we could make changes up to the last minute, which everybody wanted to do but couldn't do with the old method of sending out to a publishing house. And when I look back on this experience, I would now classify what I was doing at that point in my career as entrepreneurship. So I was acting like an entrepreneur within an organization, trying to come up with new products and services that we could use to build the business. I didn't recognize it as such back then, but now when I reflect on it, I see the beginning of my real entrepreneurial career in the entrepreneurial work I was doing at JP Morgan, building out what ultimately became the presentation group within investment banking. So that was a great experience for me. Again, now really utilizing technology to solve more important business problems and then building a small organization around that, almost like, creating an internal startup. And I think this started to kindle within me a flame of entrepreneurial ambition that later led to me leaving JP Morgan to come to Singapore to set up my first company, and as you mentioned, Parallax Capital Management, which was the precursor to Expara. So again, you can see how a series of apparently disconnected choices and decisions ultimately led to a new path, which was even more satisfying than the previous path.
Absolutely. Like I would call it like genius in like in terms of your planning, but you mentioned it wasn't necessarily all planning. So genius in terms of just doing your best and thinking on the spot. How do you keep that entrepreneurship spirit going as you kind of like grow in the corporate ladder? Because what happens, I see in some cases that as people get more established, as they get more kind of like fixed in their roles, that spirit of trying new things, of experimenting, of doing things differently dwindles down a little bit. How did you keep that alive in your career?
Yeah, so actually, I struggle with this also. And as I continued in the JP Morgan career, so I got increasing levels of responsibility. So I moved into more and more managerial type positions, which is great, in corporate career progression, because more responsibility, managing a bigger budget, managing more people. And definitely that was a very challenging and exciting experience for me. And I learned a lot through that. But in the end, I felt like ultimately this was not satisfying for me, because I thought, the more I advanced in my JP Morgan career, the more time I spent on, less time I spent on doing what I felt was creative and meaningful work, and the more time I spent on dealing with political issues and going to meetings and sitting in meetings and that type of thing, which again, it's not that that's a bad thing, but it wasn't rewarding for me. It wasn't something that I really enjoyed doing, and I didn't feel like I was creating meaningful results. I feel like one of the most important lessons that I learned throughout my career, and something that's really always guiding light for me, is satisfaction in work. And I think satisfaction in life comes from creating meaningful results. So doing things that are meaningful to you and creating meaningful results from those things. So book publishing I always felt like I was doing something meaningful because I was creating new knowledge. In investment banking, I felt like I was doing meaningful things when I was using technology to solve new problems, because I felt, first computers, then local area networks, then internet were all technologies that were going to make a huge difference in the world. And I was able to, in my small area of the world, use those to solve problems. But when my career there became more about managing a group and managerial responsibility and less about creating new products, it started to become less meaningful for me. That was why one of the reasons I made the transition in the last phase of my JP Morgan career to global markets internet, where I was working more on implementing internet, some of the first products that JP Morgan had on the internet, which was obviously hugely exciting, or maybe not obviously, but was hugely exciting, because then I started going to meetings where I would be doing presentations with titles like PowerPoint slides titled, "What is the internet?" And then the second slide would be, "Who owns internet?" And the answer is nobody. And people would be very surprised about that. So this was definitely something really exciting and meaningful to me. But that actually was what ultimately led me to Singapore, because after working with internet at JP Morgan in the late 1990s, I noticed that our US clients were very active on internet, and European clients were becoming active on internet. But in Asia, there was very little activity on our internet products. And back then in 1990, 1998 and 1999, I traveled to Southeast Asia for the first time. And I saw the reason that clients weren't using internet was that the internet hadn't really the internet wave hadn't really hit Southeast Asia at that time. And I thought, wow, that's a huge opportunity, because internet was already pretty big in the US, starting to be big in Europe, and I was sure it was going to be big in Southeast Asia. And then I also, since I was feeling less challenged and excited about the JP Morgan career, this was when I realized it's time for me to go out and really start something on my own. And it's the right time to do that in venture capital in Southeast Asia through another sort of series of somewhat coincidence. For example, my very good friend from Wharton Business School who was also working on Wall Street, was having some similar thought process to mine, wanted to start his own business and in Southeast Asia in financial services. So we teamed up on that, and ultimately that led to Parallax Capital Management, which was doing a hedge fund and early stage venture capital fund. But I think an interesting, lesson that I learned from that experience was, so after 14 years at JP Morgan, I just left and I moved to Singapore to start alternative investment manager with 3 friends. And I had only been to Singapore maybe 2 or 3 times. So I had really no experience of Singapore. I had no experience living anywhere for any length of time except the New York metropolitan area, because I spent 42 years living in either New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania, all at 90-mile radius from one another. And the first time I really made a geographical change, I moved literally halfway around the world, 12 time zones. You can't go any further without getting closer again. And then again, with not really knowing very little about Southeast Asia and almost nothing about venture capital or alternative investment management, but just believing that I was going to learn on the job and just take a chance and do it. So that's maybe the situation you were talking about before. How do you get the nerve to do that, or how do you have the courage to do that? But in fact, it was a pretty easy decision for me, because I felt like, okay, what's the worst case? I leave JP Morgan after 14 years. I go to Singapore to start my own company. If it doesn't work out, after 2 years, I come back and I can get another job in investment banking if I really want. Maybe I would take maybe I wouldn't make as much money as I would if I had stayed for 2 more years, but it's not going to be the end of the world. There's always another job in investment banking that I could probably get. And if it does work out in Singapore, then that's going to be great. And that's exactly what happened. So in the end, it worked out. And my 2 years again now became 22 years. So at the beginning, I gave myself 2 years. Let's see how it works. That was 2000. Now it's 2022. And I'm still doing venture capital in Southeast Asia.
So 2 became 22 years. That's nice to know. And
another interesting footnote to that story that I always remember. When I was walking around JP Morgan 60 Wall, which was the headquarters of JP Morgan at that time, and I was saying goodbye to the people that I work with, and tell them I was leaving. And a lot of people said to me, told me, "Oh, I really respect what you're doing. It's so great that you're making a change and that you're willing to go out on your own and give all this up," because definitely it was a comfortable life, working at JP Morgan back then, and the compensation was good and the benefits were good, and there were, I worked with great people there. There were like a lot of brilliant, talented, hardworking people from all over the world, and it was pretty good organizational culture. But many of my friends said, "I wish I could do the same thing as you, but I just can't afford to take a risk like that." And I said, "I perfectly understand." 9 months later, JP Morgan was sold to Chase. A lot of my friends lost their job at that time, and I thought, wow, so what was the bigger risk? I mean, in a way, I left ahead of that, and I left to start my own company, which was now, at least started by the time that happened. But for my friends that stayed, now some didn't. So some of my friends still work there, many years later. But definitely some of the people that told me I can't afford to lose my job, they did lose their job in the merger, and maybe at the worst possible time, because there were, thousands of other people from that merger also losing their job at the same time, and then out looking for a new job. So that was
So pretty good timing, pretty good timing. No, but another instance of kind of like, I think you just following your heart and then things working out like for the best in kind of like hindsight. But that is again very crazy to think, because I feel like we don't see these things looking forward, and like only when we kind of look back, like we're like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe, like as you said, it's almost as if it's movie like your journey in a way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
watching
yeah.
it, and if you watch it as a movie, you'll be like, I don't know if that's so realistic that it happened, but that it's crazy that it actually did. How was it like when you first moved to a new country, started up something that maybe you didn't know exactly, you hadn't been exactly in that specific segment of the field before? And again, it's a different place, it's a different industry, it's a different culture towards internet technology, towards venture capital. Still, Southeast Asia is not, I think, exactly in the same wavelength as the venture scene in the US. So I can only assume the discrepancy was much more back then when you first started. Did everything go according to plan? Did you go there and be like, you know what, this is exactly how it's going to turn out? It worked out perfectly. We were 100% right on this, or was there more to that story in a sense?
Oh, nothing went according to plan. I mean, everything. Yeah, I mean, it was when I look back on this, I think in exogenous, let's say looking at exogenous events, it was maybe the worst possible time to start a venture capital fund in Southeast Asia, because in some ways it was great because we were way ahead of the market. But in other ways, it was almost impeccably the wrong timing, because we launched our first, we launched Parallax in early 2000, so January, February 2000. And by March 2000, we saw the beginning of the dot-com collapse. So the tech market, there was a huge stock market bubble in early internet companies. And that bubble, if you go back and check, I think that bubble started to pop a month after we started our company. And then we made investments. We decided to begin our fund management career by investing ourselves. So we basically partners invested in a bunch, 5 or 6 startup companies, all of which failed within the next 2 years. So basically, the bottom dropped out of the market as soon as we started the company. And then there was a series of other exogenous shocks like 9/11, SARS, which was a precursor to COVID, later the 2007-2008 financial crisis. So throughout my first 10 years in Singapore, it was one exogenous shock after another. And I like to, when I think about that the first couple of years at Parallax, I like to describe it as we started the company like you get on a roller coaster and you're at the top of the highest hill. And right after we started, we went over that hill and went down the steepest drop. So I was at the same time, I was trying to learn how to do, venture capital and how to invest in startup companies while we're, plummeting down this 75-degree slope, everybody screaming, all the way down, and everything flying out of the car. So, but again, in hindsight, although this was, like a pretty scary experience at that time, but in hindsight, this was also very good timing in the sense that it was really one of those, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger experiences, because it didn't kill me. And it didn't kill me, and it didn't kill the company. And ultimately, Expara came out of this experience, and I started Expara in 2003, spinning off from Parallax. Even after the dot-com collapse, after SARS, and after Southeast Asia venture capital, which was basically the baby in the cradle, and it almost died because most of the early players deserted, Singapore by 2002. But I decided this is what I want to do. There was a big rush of proto venture capitalists into Singapore in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then as the market collapsed, pretty much everybody left except me and a few other people. And I decided I wanted to stay and build up helped to build the enterprise ecosystem in Singapore, so the startup and venture capital ecosystem. And I was very privileged to, have a chance to be a part of that. And that was one of the great, experiences in my career. So I'm really happy that we started at that time, despite how difficult it was.
And today, you guys are leading in the region, which is absolutely brilliant. And you really did help nurture the space. As an entrepreneur, I thank you. As an entrepreneur from Southeast Asia, I've got to thank you twice. So, it is absolutely amazing to hear that. What was the main reasons that you decided that, I'm going to stick to this. I'm going to stay, seeing everyone else kind of jump ship when things got bad in a way, because of course I doubt that was an easy decision, and especially at that point of time with all of the turmoil and, as you said, plunging down the roller coaster. I don't think that's something that would have come easy to you. And how did after that decision, how did the market recover? How did you actually go about rebuilding and forming Expara?
Oh, so I think, yeah, the reason most people left, the reason a lot of early entrants in venture capital in Singapore left was shortage of deal flow. So, they found that there weren't enough entrepreneurs starting investable companies. So I saw the same thing, shortage of deal flow. But I thought, instead of leaving, I can help to create deal flow. And how to help to create deal flow. So I started teaching at the National University of Singapore, where I'm still Adjunct Associate Professor in the business school. I started teaching new venture creation. And I thought the way to get more deal flow is to help develop that generation of young entrepreneurs that are going to create that deal flow. And I thought, this is going to take a long time. I mean, when you start at university level teaching undergrad courses in entrepreneurship, it's not going to create deal flow this quarter, but over years, it can create deal flow. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. So and again, it's not just me. There were, many people there were others and who did even more than I did. But I was one of the people contributing to this development of young entrepreneurs especially from NUS. NUS played a leading role. I like to think of NUS was sort of like if you think of Singapore as Silicon Valley of Southeast Asia, which, okay, it's a little overused, but it's still a good way to understand Singapore's place in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the region. Then NUS was like the Stanford of Singapore, creating that generation of young entrepreneurs that drove the development ecosystem. And I was, privileged to be part of that. But it takes a long-term view. But so I felt like the fundamentals were there. I felt there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs and venture capital investors in Southeast Asia. It's not going to be happening in 2020. It's not going to happen in 2001 or 2002, but it could happen at that time, I thought it could happen like 2005, 2006. In real life, it happened a little later. I would say now 2009, 2010. But I did see the long-term potential. And I thought, instead of, running away, I want to stay and help to build that. So at first as teaching at NUS and continuing to do that. And then later beginning in 2003, setting up Expara to do, at that time, mostly training, entrepreneurship training, workshops, incubation, and then later acceleration. So I thought I can help to solve this problem, roll up the sleeves, and really work to solve rather than leave and look for new opportunity. And in fact, the results there exceeded my wildest expectations, because I think now, Singapore, specifically Southeast Asia in general, is the most exciting and venture capital and startup ecosystem in the world, and one that gets the least attention. But I think there's this, we've seen increasing number of successful high growth startups coming out of Singapore, out of Indonesia, and I believe we're going to see more and more over the next 10 years, including Thailand and Vietnam, where we have been focusing heavily over the last 5 to 10 years.
Okay. And again, that is very nice to hear, because I do feel at times like there is not much stories on Southeast Asia being the next big thing, but I've always believed it because I'm ridiculously biased because I'm from there. But it's validating to hear that from you as well. And you've after that went on to build so many things, expanded Expara to I think different parts of Southeast Asia, not just Singapore. Looking back now, what do you think were some of your most fulfilling achievement that you've seen over the last few years in really growing this whole initiative?
Oh, wow. Most fulfilling achievement is hard to say because I had so many fulfilling achievements, but I would say, okay, if I had to think just about personally fulfilling, it's the teaching that I did in universities, which, okay, it sounds funny because yeah, I have done a lot of different things, and definitely teaching in the university, it's not the most financially rewarding, but from a personal satisfaction perspective, I think that's the most rewarding activity that I've had. Because why? Because when I would teach a new venture creation course or teach an entrepreneurship course or teach a venture capital course in Sassen, and then one of my students would go on to great success as an entrepreneur or a venture capital investor, I would feel like that course actually helped this person to realize their dream. So, I've been focused a lot in my career on realizing my own dreams, making sure that I do what's important to me, what's meaningful to me, and create meaningful results for others. And in teaching, I have had a chance and continue to have a chance to help others to do that. And of course, when I impact others that way, then they go on to impact others. So you get that, pass it forward feeling of having ability to improve the lives of so many people through a very simple activity of teaching. And I'll get every once in a while, I'll get an email or have a conversation with a student. Sometimes I get emails from students, former students, who say, your course really changed my life. What I learned in that class, I never thought about being an entrepreneur before. And then I decided to become an entrepreneur, and now I've done it, and it was the best decision I ever made. And I'm so happy with the outcome, and I feel, almost want to cry, like tears of happiness, like to feel, wow, I was able to directly impact somebody that way. And venture capital also has similar fulfilling aspects because we focus on very early stage, pre-seed, seed, and post-seed, and pre-series A, which is the real foundation stage for startup companies. We're usually the first investor or outside investor in the company. And again, I get that similar satisfaction of working with somebody who has a dream to change the world in some way. Of course, this has almost become cliche. Entrepreneurs want to change the world, but just because it's cliche doesn't mean it's not true in some cases. And I do see the most successful entrepreneurs that I've met, they really do want to change the world, and they can do it when they're successful. So having a chance to contribute to that is also extremely rewarding.
Okay, absolutely brilliant. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface of your many experiences, the many amazing things that you've done. And I completely did not realize that we're almost towards the end of our session, which is so tragic because I have so many questions, so many things that I want to know more about. But I guess to wind down our conversation, normally I ask our speakers what their message is to students. But I feel like students right now have probably been knocked out by the sheer the sheer amazingness of your story, and are probably still digesting and recovering. And as an entrepreneur, as someone who probably is still in the very early stages of my career, I have been fortunate to meet many business owners, company owners who are much more successful, much more established. For you, who has been very established in three different, completely different segments of your career, in three different points of your life, and have gone on to do the next great thing, the next amazing thing, and today even help so many others to realize that. What's your advice to everyone out there who maybe has achieved a certain amount of success, not sure where to hit next, and maybe wants to give back to the community? What would you say to them?
Oh, so the question was, what would be advice I would give to somebody who wants to start their own business or who's already started their own business?
Yeah, who's already started their own business, but maybe has some success, not yet to the place like of complete where they want to be, but wants to give back, wants to help others achieve that same amount of success.
Oh, so, okay. So I would say let's say you achieve some level of success, but you want to help others or you want to achieve more success. So I would say the single most important piece of advice is take more risk. Whatever level of risk you're taking now, increase. And if we look at my story that we talked about in this discussion, at each stage of my career, I increased the level of risk I was taking. So I would take more and more risk at each junction. And this creates a risk-return trade-off, where by taking more risk, when you are successful in taking that risk, you're able to achieve much more meaningful results. So whatever you're doing now, whatever level of risk you're taking, increase that level of risk to achieve the next level of success. And as you achieve a higher level of success, then you can help more people. I always like to, sometimes in our business, people will distinguish between, for example, a startup that is like a for-profit startup and a social enterprise. Because for-profit startup is perceived as just trying to make money, and social enterprise trying to solve pressing social problems. And I have tremendous respect for both, for-profit startups and social enterprise, but I don't think you necessarily need to choose. I think you can create the very successful for-profit startup that also solves pressing social problems. So I would think about if you want to give back, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs do want to give back, think about how your startup can not just make a lot of money or not just solve pressing social problems, but do both at the same time. For example, now we're focusing a lot on agri-tech and food tech startups. And if you think about the successful agri-tech and food tech startups can not only be financially rewarding, but can also solve pressing social problems relating to food systems. So I would say try to follow your, summing up in a way, do something that you're passionate about doing. When you do that, you will work harder than you would if you're doing something that you think you should be doing. Working harder at something that you're passionate about will enable you to be the best at that. Being the best at what you're doing will enable you to be successful, and then take more risk and be more successful and repeat.
All right. Very, very well said. And thank you so much for actually spending your time with us, for sharing all of your experiences and your words of wisdom. I personally have been extremely inspired, and I think I speak for our audience that this has been an amazing conversation. So thank you for your time. And I hope that you had as much fun as we did in sharing your experiences that we had in listening to them.
I certainly did. And I just wanted to mention, if you're interested in finding out more about the experiences, I'm actually writing a book now about my experiences and also how it fits in with my career development, and also about venture capital and startup. So if anybody's interested to find out more about that, they can go to our website and they can register the interest in the book. So I can
That's amazing. And I'll drop the links as well for that.
Oh, can you see my chat or no?
No, we can't. Right.
Oh, so anyway, you just go to expara.com/book. Yeah, it's
Okay.
very easy. So anyway,
nice. Yeah, I like that. And I will definitely share the link around, and I definitely will drop my name in as well, because I truly appreciated this conversation, and I think that there's so much more that we can learn from you. And hopefully when the book is out, we can get you back on the show and talk about that as well to our audience. So thank you so much. And
Yes.
with that, guys, thank you to our audience as well for joining in. This has been Changing Reality. We're on every Thursday at 10 p.m. BT from WQHS Radio in the Philadelphia area, but wherever that is around the world for you guys. So thank you guys for watching, and see you all again next Thursday. Bye.
Thank you.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.